we go. Danny, do you want to make any comments before we hand back to George?
Yeah, look, I'll just say that, this has been a great process of really extending the work that the Friends have done with Reach 4 a bit further to the south, down around Kingsbury and the planting up to Settlement Road. And it's been great having George come on board and really help with that planning. So, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to activate the community, local community, and for people to take on some stewardship for the site. And yeah, DCMC are ready to help out. So I think that's all I'll say at this point.
Okay, don't. Great. George, over to you.
And Margaret, just before George starts, can I just put Tim's apologies in for tonight?
Oh, sure. Yep. So that Emma from Whittlesea. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, well, I'm sorry if I don't have as much energy tonight as I did at our last stakeholder meeting. I've actually got COVID. I sort of was diagnosed and I've been in isolation and on antivirals and still feeling a bit foggy and groggy and all of that. But look, the project, for those of you who've had the opportunity to walk the site, is quite an interesting one. It's tackling the section of the, oh, sorry, what's going on here? I don't seem to be able to. Oh, no, that's working now.
You don't.
Yeah, so it's to tackle some areas along the creek north of McLean's Road. Now, a fair bit of work have gone into this by Tim Connell from Whittlesea and his staff, colleagues, and also from Danny and the team and the Friends group. And based on an earlier couple of walks, some with the officers of the various organisations, but then the later one with more members of the public, we looked at various zones. And Tim's drawn them up nicely, or someone has, from Whittlesea, and to the various zones. And these also correlate with the zones that Danny had shared with me earlier, where DCMC together with Whittlesea have been coordinating some weed control in preparation for revegetation. So it's an interesting section of the Darebin Creek. We're lucky that there's been an earlier generation of revegetation. Some of it might have been in earlier sort of employment program eras, and some of it were more recent, I say recent, possibly 2 decades ago, work by Melbourne Water. So in some sections, we've got good stands of young red gums, very few remnant old trees, of course. It's an area that was essentially highly modified at some point in the mid-20th century. But there's also some areas where there's very good cover of Indigenous shrubs, particularly some of the ones that were in popular use 20, 30 years ago of Indigenous provenance, things of the Yarra like the woolly tea tree and a whole lot of other wattles and stuff. But there was nowhere near as much coverage of the site with the sorts of riparian trees and shrubs that the site can take. And as we've seen this year with extreme wet, there's opportunity to try and create something long-term that's going to suck up that extra moisture, those extra nutrients seeping down from the adjacent slopes or through the fluctuating levels of the creek, so that it doesn't perpetually go back to long grass and woody weeds forever. And so by targeting some zones with intense plantings, the whole idea is to provide good bird habitat, continuity of habitat. There's good work that's been going on north and south of this reach of the creek. There's been examples that we've had a look at further downstream and further upstream. And there's models of riparian vegetation along the entire Yarra that have served a whole range of riparian revegetation projects in the northern Melbourne area as a model. And we look to the riparian zones of the Yarra as a valid model, because our creeks, our highly modified creeks and our highly modified catchment areas now are wetter than they were pre-European times. The catchments are more developed, so there's more runoff from hard surfaces. There's the intensity of climate extremes that we're starting to see, and this year's been a case in point. So there certainly is a more permanent waterway than might have been the Darebin Creek over 200 years ago. So there's some general principles. We also know that such nutrient-rich sites on rich new volcanic soils with moisture available will always tend towards weediness, because those moisture-rich, nutrient-rich, disturbed conditions will always favour the introduced plants, old world plants from Eurasia, from continents where nutrients, moisture, and gross disturbance of the soil crusts, that those plants are adapted to, and that's why they're successful weeds. So my suggestions have been to not try and say, well, look, 200 years ago would have been pristine native grassland, very few trees, perhaps a few more trees along the creek line. We're not trying to recreate that. What we're trying to do is substitute a weedscape with a valid indigenous suite of plants local to the area and matching them to the sites. And to do that, I won't spend a lot of time on this. This document has been shared before. I walked the creek and we looked at various sections that correspond with those in the maps that Tim had shared. And we looked at what was there, what's missing, what could be done. And the focus has been to select species that, with a little bit of site preparation, a little bit of weed control, a bit of getting rid of the woody weeds, getting rid of some of the kikuyu, species of trees, shrubs that once established will be able to suppress some of that regenerating weed problem, so that they are the pioneers of habitat restoration. And it is about habitat. So it's not about pristine ecological vegetation classes, it's about matching plants to site conditions. So we've got sites like Section J, which down the bottom there is pretty much a fresh palette. There's some new areas we discussed. I think Claire had come up with some suggestions. Could we get some more shade trees down the Dealing Court? Is it Dealing Court or Dealing? Anyway, it's the court near the southeast here, and Danny's marked that up as Section J1. So he's gone back to the original planting list that I prepared that had way too many plants. We even sort of looked at potential understory species, and we had a look at every zone. And we've got in all of those zones plants that we know are going to do really well in wet zones. We're starting with the tall trees, the medium trees, the small trees, the larger shrubs down to the smaller shrubs. And then you start talking about potential small shrubs and understory species where they could be easily lost in competition with weeds. And from that list, Danny, and in discussions, has pruned some of those things, especially some of the smaller plants and so on. But we've ended up with a very good mix of plants of dry sites for those artificially elevated dry sites well away from the riparian from zone, some areas that have had a history of compaction. The use of dry site plants up on the upper shoulders and elevated ground is to prepare the site for the extreme dry years, the years that we're going to get extreme desiccating winds. Some of those elevated sites are also exposed to long afternoon sunlight, etc. And we know that with the warming of the Indian Ocean, we get more and more of these periods in summer where you get the hot desiccating winds. So on the list that I've shared and developed and that Danny's taken further, we've made notes of which plants are obligatory down near the wet zones, which ones are generalists, which ones are right on the creek edge, where there may be some safety issues as to who plants them and how they're planted. We've got plants for dry sites as well. Here's my voice. We've also marked on the planting list in bold the must plant sort of plants, and those that aren't highlighted in bold are certainly still on the list. Great if the budget and everything else that comes together next year to allow for those things to be planted. We've also identified some sites where there's particular seats or vistas, and where there may be particular features where we may have to plant certain plants in a particular spot, more or less adding some of the amenity values, creating a nice little sort of haven that people can enjoy the creek, can enjoy their walks along there, and thinking about not the way the weather is at the moment. The weather at the moment is very wet, slushy, overcast, freezing, bleak Antarctic winds. But most of the time, looking at how summers have been, unfolding in this northern Melbourne area, those extreme sunny days, those extreme hot spells, we need to create a mild microclimate, not just for the birds and any arboreal mammals and other things that use the creek line, an open space linear reserve, but also for the humans to enjoy. And so shade is a big thing, planting dense clumps in places to break the wind, especially for the northerlies, to create a microclimate which lends itself to greater enjoyment, better wildlife habitat, but also we're putting in the earlier stages of an intensive revegetation effort, which will allow other generations of friends, local government projects, cycles of funding in subsequent years to do further species enrichment, perhaps in the understory, spaces created by the dense domination of these former weedy sites with these dense overstory plantings. So a lot of different concepts and ideas coming together there. I just wanted to, sorry, my voice is going. So there's also some areas that came up in discussions and in the volley of emails between, particularly the work that Danny's put into it with John and others, no doubt. There's sections on the east where we've got, sorry, I'll just switch to the aerial photo map. Can you see that Google Maps thing there? So we've got the area on the east there near Samuel Court, Samuel Park. And whilst the original brief was to look at the actual riparian zone, we've got an area there where there's been some good revegetation in the past, opportunity to perhaps do more planting in there away from the creek edge using, from the spreadsheet that's been developed, species of dry sites and dry rocky outcrops. So whilst I haven't been involved in developing that species list, it's certainly one of the things that John has picked up on, and Danny and others, that we could be engaging with more local residents than are already active in volunteering or with a friends group through focusing on nodes of this linear reserve, which we know people have a shared interest in. There's also a particular zone at the north end, which we call Zone A. Just see if I can zoom in a bit. Yeah, Zone A, up near the Green Hills Road footbridge, and where there's a couple of paths, the one that goes underneath the footbridge that continues north, and also the ramps that come in from the Green Hills Road west. So when we look at those areas up the north end, I just felt that there was a good opportunity there to have a bit of a showy representation of more of the species. So if you look at Zone A, we start looking at, getting a diversity of eucalypts,
Could you zoom that up, George? Yes, just about.
Sorry, could I ask a question?
Certainly.
What suburb is that you're talking about?
It's in Bundoora. So we're in the city of Whittlesea, the southern
Yep.
city of Whittlesea in Bundoora. And there's two sides of the Darebin Creek north of McLean's Road. So we're looking at the section of the Darebin Creek from McLean's Road north to Green Hills Road.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there it is there. It's the section from McLean's Road in Bundoora right up to Green Hills Road, and there's a footbridge there. That's not a sort of a road right across there. So it's an area that's, I suppose it hasn't had the amount of interest of, let's say, parts of the Darebin Creek further south, which have a much longer history of revegetation, and certainly nowhere near as much of the work that's happened in the lower Merry Creek, but it's nonetheless a suburban setting, but an opportunity for real enhancement. But there's some really good sections as well, just north of the Green Hills Road footbridge. So we've looked at the collective efforts of, I suppose, 3 decades of revegetation, weed control, and some natural regeneration that has gone into these natural areas. So it's a bit of a missing link. You can see how void of good habitat that's been. And those who have been to the site recently will have seen the work that's happened in the last year to control the woody weeds along that entire section of the creek. Now, I should mention, and those of you on the social media might have seen all the whingers and moaners complaining about the long grass. It's like there's this negative, perception about what local government should be doing, could be doing, etc. And I'm sorry for those of you that copped that this year about such open spaces. People don't realise how extreme this wet weather has been. Entire towns have been swept away by floods. But if you go to some of the Facebook pages about the Bundoora community, all you see is whinging about the long grass. So that will be an issue that council workers and contractors are fighting very hard to play catch up at the moment. But I think in the long run, areas that can be densely revegetated with a strong competitive overstory of appropriate Indigenous, regionally relevant trees and shrubs, you'll end up creating a little enjoyable haven where it doesn't just revert to long grass, kikuyu, European grasses, and woody weeds. So that's pretty much the issue. Look, it's a section of the creek that lends itself better to on-site walk. So those of you who have had that advantage and know the area well will realise that it's got a lot of good potential. Got some really good clumps along that we're going to be adding to. We're going to be adding species that aren't already there. So that's the plan. Now, Danny, one of the things that I haven't done, I haven't gone into some of your suggestions about how each stage could be tackled, but things that came out of previous meetings is that each zone has got its particular attributes, and that the whole idea is that in any planting calendar, rather than try and lose everyone over that entire length, trying to tackle all 10 stages or 11 stages all in one date, that we would be tackling things in logical clumps and sorting the plants recommended for each one of those areas. Now, I believe Danny and John, if I'm not mistaken, and others have already made those suggestions. I've seen in the emails that I've been copied in on, suggestion as a calendar. The things that I've raised and were discussed about, areas that needed a bit more weed control, or areas that we were going to widen out further with the revegetation, perhaps to take it up to a sewerage easement or to take it up to the shared bicycle path on the west, so that we don't leave these little nothing zones, which just create more work for the mowing contractors and risks of mowing tractors getting bogged in wet zones. So there's some additional weed control that needs to be done in some places. And from what I can see, Danny, you're onto it. So correct me if I'm wrong. Do you want to speak to things now? Were there things that people wanted me to clarify? I've been all over the shop. I am a bit foggy with this COVID, so my mind's probably not as clearly structured as I was in my last presentation to you. But anyway.
Yeah, all right. So
comments and questions.
Do you want to stop the share screen? And Danny, do you want to comment on?
Yeah, sure.
George's
No, it's
and think about the plans.
Yeah, well, it's been you know, what George has come up with there with the different zones and the information on the different species and where they need to go, particularly with the dry and the wet, is really useful, I think, and something that we can apply in right along the Darebin. But yeah, certainly through our discussions, we talked about making sure that we have those sites in manageable parts, and not trying to do it all at once. Though we do want to have a larger community planting day. I think having some smaller events for a more local group, smaller group that can focus on those more technical areas, and also use it as a bit of a training process, so that when there is that large community day, then the smaller the community group can act as leaders on that day. So I guess just, you know, with seasonal work and working back through that, Tim Connell has, I believe, put in an order with Vinc for plants. So that's the most urgent thing for now. And then looking forward, we would need to have some more follow-up on the blackberry, and that's usually tackled around that late summer period, sort of late February, March. And then hopefully we're working with the contractors, having site preparation happening through a couple of runs to ensure that the site's well prepared and we don't have too many issues with weeds once planting begins. But yeah, I guess there's a little bit more conversation to have about which of those areas we would then work on first with the community group. But I think that section A, George, sounds like a good one for the smaller community group, because it is to be a showcase and there's a bit more diversity going in there. And we did talk about putting in some of the understory plants. So that's not an area we'd like to do with, you know, 100 or more community people, but perhaps that thinking about the larger community day, which is scheduled for July 2nd. John reminded me earlier today that it might make sense too in terms of access, that I think it's, I've got the map in front of me, but it's section J on the east side, because there is that parking access, but also perhaps some of those areas up near Samuel Court. So probably focusing on some of those areas on the east side for that community day. And the other thing that you've mentioned, George, is that some of the areas, the gradient on the riparian zones is quite steep. So that is something that we could look to get the contractors to actually do planting in some of those areas. And then I think with some of the other areas on the west side, we might look to, even coming out into August, look to have some school groups come through, perhaps with some of the local community acting as leaders again, like we've done further south with Reach for Kingsbury, and acting as leaders and planting it out. But I guess the main thing is that we're making sure that it's done in manageable bite sizes, and not trying to just get it all in one go. So, you know, making sure we've got that quality control, and that people are able to ease into it and learn as they go, and building confidence, and then share that knowledge. And as you mentioned, George, too, also I think before that even starts, getting once we get the plants from the nursery, doing some sorting about which zones they're to go in, and which areas within those zones are they to go in the wetter areas down closer to the creek or up on the dry banks and that sort of thing. So coming up with a bit of a system there that will make it a lot easier for everyone as we go through. But yeah, a bit more to go through that, but the calendar's starting to take shape.
Mm. Mm.
Jarrell, you've got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to second some of the points that you were making there, Danny, as I'm walking through some of the plantings at the Kingsbury Bowls. You know, as plants have sort of gone in more of an ad hoc way, you might see 3 she oaks coming up within a metre of each other, which is obviously going to be a problem 5 years from now. And there's also some contractual issues, I think, between the contractors that are due to sort of mow around the plantings where there's not much of a gap between 2 beds. They're sort of not mowing there now. So it does take a higher level of communication for contractors to be like, okay, guys, it's okay to get X close to the plants as long as you don't, you know, smash through a bunch of the plants. So I would agree with George there, where it's going to take maybe just a little while for everything to settle, for contractors to understand where they can and can't go, and for us to observe and then give back those constructive criticisms to people who can talk to the contractors and allow, because I think sort of the areas still between the plantings are areas which are still such beautiful places to go down and watch the plants grow, and it's one of the reasons why people put their hand up to get involved in these projects. So it is a little bit of a sticking point, but it's not something that can't be worked through. It just takes potentially a higher level of communication.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Gerald.
And if I could come in just there, the things that Jarrell's talking about, he makes them sound like problems. What they really are is what we learned from the previous planting and what we see with grass growth and mowing contractors on the site. So we've already had some good site discussions with members of the Friends group and from DCMC about how we're using trees like the lightwoods or the she oaks to create that edge for any clump we do plant, so that they become almost the bollards of the future.
Mm.
Nice curvy lines for the mowing contractors, but also to create that density of competition. And Jarrell, I have no problem with 3 she oaks close together. I wouldn't plant she oaks in less than 3 or 5.
Yeah, I would just say that, yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's just a matter of waiting for our natural bollards to get long enough that a tractor would be injured by the tree and not the other way around. But yeah, I 100% agree.
But those group plantings will be important for suppressing the weed growth in the future.
Yeah.
Getting those mulch beds for other understory plants of the future.
Does anybody want to make any comments or?
Margaret, there are 2 people with their hands up.
Are
Oh,
there?
there were.
I can't see anyone here.
I think it was Jarrell and George, and they've both said their piece.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Well, that's one other thing I meant to mention is it'd be good then once all the planting's done in the spring to have a bird survey with the community, and that becomes important because part of what we're doing is we're putting back habitat. So, it's just gone in, and that'll act as a baseline. And then over time, if we do that each year, hopefully that's a way of recording the change. And we should see some results come through from having those regular bird surveys. Because sometimes with projects, we do the plantings, that's all good, and then forget about it. But if we're recording that positive change, then that's a really good way of keeping everyone motivated too.
Yeah, that's a good point. We already have the data from from winter as the start to that area. Emma.
I just wanted to well, first of all, to say hello, because there's a few people here that I don't know, and introduce Silvana, who's also from the city of Whittlesea. So I'm the land care facilitator, and my job is to sort of work with land care groups and friends groups and around sort of community engagement, and just sort of often just being a conduit of information back and forwards a lot of the time. Silvana is the community development officer for Bundoora Mill Park. But I look at this, it's been a whole lot of amazing technical information tonight, and I just wanted to sort of ask the community members that are here what else, what other ideas they had for things to do, or people to link into, or groups that might be, walking up and down and using the track and things. So I thought I'd change tack a little bit and sort of just throw it out there to see if there's any other ideas or observations or questions or pressing things that they really want to do, or challenges, I suppose, that we can then sort of start to work through with the local community about how we pull this project off.
Therese, and then Nick and Linda. Therese, you had your hand up.
Yes, I wasn't clear about the timing of some of the events. Some people seem to be talking about next year, and I think Danny just referred to spring. Does he mean this spring or spring next year?
Next year. So yeah, the planning is for next year. So the plant orders have just gone in for next season, because it takes time to collect all the seed and grow the seedlings. So I will work on a calendar to send out to share around, a proposed calendar, and we can work on that for the different activities and different events. But yeah, I think the next activity will be engaging contractors to do the follow-up control on the blackberry in late summer. We could do some site preparation now, but it's sort of that thing, I think, with everything wet and growing, it's probably just going to grow back again. So yeah, maybe look to next season, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Nick and Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Emma, you asked a question in regards to how we can, communicate with the community. We have a 4-year-old that goes to McLean's Road Kindergarten, so we're using their platform to try and, promote what we're doing here as well. Plus the letter drop boxes, which I know, John, you had those pamphlets ready for us as well. So they're the two avenues that we've tried to use. Also for George, that walkthrough we had a few months ago was fantastic. For those of you that missed out, it'd be great if we had that recorded anywhere, because it'd be easy for people to understand where you're coming from. But if you do have the chance, that swing bridge at the north side of where we're talking about, if you look north from that, and I think, George, you mentioned it, it's exactly what we want to try and create on the south side. So for those of you that just want to walk around there and check it out, I would highly recommend just picturing that in your head, because that's pretty much what we want to try and achieve for the long term.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, Nick, that would be it'd be a really good spot for some photos, from boards with some photos of, we want to get from this to this, and an information point.
And we know there's lots of reptiles, blue-tongued lizards around that bridge that live there, and we see them a lot during the spring and summer. So, and we want to see more of that as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nick and Linda. Emma, do you think that Whittlesea might organise some interpretive signage?
I think we could explore it, or even if it's, even if we need to create a project or something around, what that might look like. But I think it'd be really good to brainstorm it with the local community members that are involved first to see, you know, you're the ones that use the track and, you know, use the area and know what sort of people walk up and down it, whether it's, you know, is it young people with little kids, or is it, you know, bike riders or dog walkers, and, you know, that, and where do they stop and where do they keep moving and where do they kind of interact and stuff like that. So I think it's yeah, I think there's some local conversations before we just whack stuff up. I'd hate to see it just being whacked up with City of Whittlesea plastered all over it as well. I think it's about maybe, you know, and maybe there's a project around that too with the school or the kinder or things to create something that's a little bit more locally relevant.
Yeah, I think it's important for the project to be seen at two different levels as well. Like, I think it's important to get very local community, so the community that is directly affected by the project that is being done, aka this particular project. But then I also think it's important to communicate what the broader project plan is. So this particular project is obviously going to have a direct effect on the Reach 4 project that's happening further down, and then obviously the Darebin flows off into another water source. So I think somehow manage it without overwhelming people with a whole bunch of information. But yeah, I think it is important that, I mean, for me personally, it's been important for me to be able to have a direct impact on a local area. I can't stop them clear felling the Amazon, but I can get down to the Darebin and do something. So I've always felt like it's a good way of presenting to people that you can't do everything about the existential crisis of climate change, but you can wander down to the end of the street and plant a plant, or you can help with weed suppression once the plants are in, or you can get involved in the community group, whether it's Friends of Darebin Creek, whether it's DCMC, or all of the local councils that the Darebin flow through. It's sort of a coming together, or I personally believe it's a coming together of all of those groups to try and find greater ways of engaging community in any way that we can.
And I'll just pick up on that point, Jarell, and have a shout out to Michelle Morris sitting there, because Michelle is part of the Green Street group far south of certainly Maclean's Road and Reach 4. But Michelle's obviously interested because the water's going to flow past her backyard, and that's great to have you listening to all of this, Michelle.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Margaret. And I just want to say I just am very impressed by the degree of organisation and yeah, how thought through all of this is. And I'm very keen to actually go and visit, and I always find I pick up ideas. So yeah, we're in just a little bit upstream from the parklands. How would you describe it? Yeah, Green Street, just a bit upstream from the Livingston Bridge. So we've been, I think it's now at least 12 years. Yeah, we've been doing revegetation and have our annual event with the Friends since the inception of our revegetation.
Yes.
So Danny and I were speaking the other day and talking about how there could be some real benefits in getting people like you, Michelle, up, to a planting activity or to just a walk or whatever, but to actually, talk to the community upstream and say, well, this is where we were, 10 years ago or whatever, and these are the things we've done, and these are the benefits, not just on ground, but to our, social benefits and all the other things that come out of being involved, actively involved in a community group, doing stuff in your own, literally backyard, in your own backyard.
In your own backyard, yeah.
Yeah.
John. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, John.
Therese has got her hand up as well.
Yes, I think there's a couple of others before me. if they want to be there. Okay.
okay.
All I wanted to say was that just Jarell's remark reminds me that we haven't really quite fully acknowledged the initiative of Whittlesea Council in all this, and particularly Tim Connell and his team. And it was their engagement with Friends of Darebin Creek last year that led to the planting activity in Norris Bank Reserve and to Tim having a 4-year plan to go up the creek. So this section we're talking about is just the first of those 4 years, and Whittlesea Council's very strong involvement has been central to this, but also puts it in a broader context as well.
Yeah, thank you. George, you?
Yeah, look, I just wanted to offer a few words of optimism. The site preparation work that's happened to date and the additional work that Danny and John have outlined with Tim's crew that will happen is already showing to people who walk there something's going on. When some of these fast-growing trees go into these wet, nutrient-rich zones near the edge of the creek, some of the manigums, the blackwoods, the silver wattle, in places that were previously just blackberry and woody weeds, within 2 years, there'll be trees shooting up towards the sky there. They'll be better than any interpretive sign you could spend your money on. Add to that a couple of the things that are going to happen near some of the seats, near some of the ramps coming in at the south or up near the footbridge, and people are going to see action. And we know that in some of these shrubs in riparian zones, like I quoted the example from down at Banyule Flats in 1989, we had small birds, wrens and firetail finches, nesting in shrubs a year after a mega planting. I think vegetation action and the site that you're dealing with, you're going to see within a year or two, people are going to slow down there a bit more. There's going to be spots where it's going to have that feel, that three-dimensionality. It's something you can't really, it's something the best interpretive signage can't buy. There's nothing like really good revegetation action. Site like this, it's almost like plants on hydroponic drip. The sequencing of the site preparation and the planting will change that site in the first 2 to 3 years. And by another 5 or 10 years, people will love to walk down there. The same way as our open spaces have been loved to death in these COVID years, people are rediscovering their local open spaces. I really feel positive about, what you've already started there collectively.
Yeah, that's great to think about, George, how quickly it can all come together. And just want to pick up on Linda and Nick's comment in the chat there that you've got a Facebook group with some members. So those local people are going to continue, to hear from you both, and we certainly want to keep up the contact there as well. Now, Therese, have you got a question?
I had my question answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just noticing the time here. Is there, so what the Friends will be doing with DCMC, with Danny is, as Danny says, working out the calendar, but also importantly, we'll be wanting to keep in touch with local people, and Claire and Iris and Linda and Nick as the core group of all of that, and you'll be bringing people with you. So we'll be thinking and planning and be back in touch with you about how to continue to have small events until we can work out a more formal calendar of what's going to happen. Maybe we can arrange information to that sort of local Samuel Court group of when the contractors are going to be there, or sort of for the local people to kind of notice the repair work that will start to happen as the start of that idea of George's, that people will notice that something's happening and start to be engaged and interested. Oh, Emma.
So Claire and Iris and Nick and Linda, is there anyone else here that's from the local area? Because I think it would be, really valuable to get in a conversation outside of this, but another time with Silvana, who's the local community development officer, and myself, and we can just sort of nut out some really localized sort of, a little bit of a casual strategy on, how we can support you to get the word out and potentially help sort of recruit some more active participants in the local area. Is it just Nick and Linda and
Claire and Iris?
Is there some others? And I guess the next question is, are you happy for Friends of Darebin Creek to flick your details over to me so that we can make contact?
Yeah, there are probably another 3 or 4 families that would probably get involved if we pushed. So we could do that on our side.
Yeah, awesome. And you're happy for say Margaret to share, or Danny to share your contact details with me?
That's fine.
Yeah.
I think I've also added you to our Facebook page as well.
Yeah, I am on yours. Yeah, that's me.
Cool.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send out a follow-up email and we'll think of something to do sort of in a small way pretty soon to keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Does anybody want to make any other comments or ask any further questions? Or George, thank you very much. You speak with such skill, and you create pictures with your words that I think help us all to feel like we want to get right out there right now and start. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being such an enthusiastic group to start with. And I mean, and Jarell said it, like we watch these documentaries about the Amazon, and there's nature in our backyard, and we can do something right near where we live. And this year's a case in point that even the ugliest of the wattles, black wattle, which we know is one of the #1 species for biodiversity of insects, which translates to birds, it has been a bumper year for the flowering of black wattle, Acacia moonsii. The ugliest duckling of our wattles has been the most spectacular swan in flower this year. So we'll be putting in all those sorts of things, and the place will change for the better.
Yeah, I might just say on the back of those that I was talking to Danny yesterday, and a couple of those black swans of the acacia world, they're growing that quick that I've had to hit Danny up for some very long stakes to bring them back upright, because there's been so much water and so much growth that they've actually laid over a touch. So I'll have to get out there and prop them back up straight. But it is a very good point that sometimes you can get frustrated with how long and the size of the problem, but some of these fast-growing natives, it is absolutely astonishing how quickly they'll throw themselves up. Within 24 months, you've got a 2.5 metre, 3 metre acacia, and it's in full flower. And then you've got some structure and some overstory. And I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure we're already seeing some of our native birds coming back through. So we probably are due to do a little bit of a bird study and try and work out whether we've got some invertebrates coming in. And really, we're always stressing about, there's too much weeds, or this and that and the other. And it's good to do that. But when you really take a step back from these plantings, it's been very, very successful. And super heartening, and it does make you feel like you can actually have an effect with all of the doom and gloom about the climate.
Yeah, thank you, Jarell. All right, now, Therese, was that another question, or has your hand still been up there from?
No, it's a new thing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment. I wanted to say thanks for the optimism from Jorel and George. And also, Danny will remember on Saturday morning, we were at an event in Nanyang Tamboree in Plenty Road.
Yep, that's your local area there, Therese, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And I had to leave early and I walked alone along the creek. Back, it was about 500 metres. And the birds were incredible. I couldn't see them. I could hear them.
Yeah.
There were lots of different birds and lots of them.
Yeah, thank you. That's another vote of optimism that what's happening down there.
Could I just say good night and thank you to everyone?
Yep, thanks, Therese. Bye. All right, well, I think that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. It's great to see everyone's names and faces there and know that the interest is there. We'll be able to keep working with that kind of interest. Thank you very much. John, thank you too, organising all of this. And Michelle, yep, thank you. And it'll go up on YouTube. We'll let everyone know where it is so that you can access the information later on, especially for that Samuel Court group.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
See you later. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.